I kind of want to start off probably the thing that has been asked the most of me on this trip, and it's probably very disappointing to anybody who asked me, and it's happened here. It happened about 8 times here. Is somebody comes up and says, "Is this really the place? Is this actually really the place?" And my answer is, it usually varies between no, certainly not, and maybe. And here's the thing. One of the things I really want to drive home is, and I gave that response here. A lot of people ask me, is this really the spot? And I said, it might be. I think it's really, it seems like really reasonable to think that stone face that we saw is in fact Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. That seems really reasonable. But, I read a bunch of stuff on these things, and people argue, and people give reasons why it's not, and people give tons of reasons why the tomb can't be his. I don't know, but it seems really reasonable to think that is actually Golgotha, where he was crucified. It does look like a skull face. And Golgotha means, in Hebrew, as Erica pointed out, the place of the skull. And I had people come up and ask, why Calvary? Where did that term come from? That's the Latin translation of Golgotha. So Calvary and Golgotha mean the exact same thing. One is Hebrew, one is Latin. That's that. And Erica kind of alluded to that. You remember she pointed out the Spanish word for it, Calvario, which is, of course, a Latin, Spanish is a Latin language. I wanted to read a verse, though, that really struck me, because when I was first studying up on this, I thought, the tomb and the place where Jesus was crucified in the same spot, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, it's correct. I mean, I was just talking with Alan. Alan said, sorry for calling you out, Alan, but Alan said, I've read that 1,000 times and I never noticed it. And I have to say, me either. So John chapter 19, and Matthew corroborates this. So both Matthew and John say something similar. Verse 40, John chapter 19, verse 40, then they took the body of Jesus, they bound it in strips of linen, which are with the spices, as is the custom of the Jews to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb where no one yet had been laid. So the implication is that there was a garden located right next to where Christ was crucified, and that there was a tomb in that garden, and Jesus was buried in that garden. I don't know how I never noticed that before. Maybe it's just because you read fast and just kind of spin it by. So it's very reasonable to think that is where Jesus was crucified. That's certainly the best argument I've ever heard. And therefore, it stands to reason that Jesus' tomb is in this particular garden where we're at. Whether it's that one, I'm not sure, but it's somewhere in this garden. That's what I would guess. Now, this is important because as soon as we're done here, we're going out and we're going to go on a long walk. Yay. We're going to go get lunch. And of course, Benny's pointed out that we're going to walk the Via Dolorosa, which means the road of pain, and we're going to end at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, sepulchre means a burial place. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the traditional site where Jesus was buried, and it's located right next to the traditional site where people believe that he was crucified. Now, let me just tell you right there, no. Where we're going, not it. Not it for about 1,000 reasons, and I'm going to give you those. I'm not going to give all of them to you. I'm going to state just a couple things. One, book of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 12 tells us that when Jesus was crucified, he was crucified outside of the old gates of the city. We are going within the old gates of the city. So right there. But here, just a little story. For those of you guys who went with us to Bethlehem yesterday, we stopped at the Church of the Nativity, which... Benny said, and if it's not the oldest, he said it's the oldest church in the world. If it's not the oldest, it certainly is one of the oldest. And keep in mind, the reason why it's so old is Christianity didn't become legal in the empire until the year 312 AD. So all churches up until 312 were illegal. So you didn't build big churches. It isn't until the Roman Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, and then he passes what's called the Edict of Milan, declaring religious tolerance for all people, which then made Christianity a legal, viable religion, that you started having big churches built. And he was kind of the guy who built the first big churches. Well, famously, and many of you have heard me say this before, his mother, who also converted to Christianity, she actually converted before he did, she went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 330s. And when she came here, she believed that God spoke to her and told her exactly where all these holy moments took place. So yesterday when we went to the Church of the Nativity, she believed God had told her that that was where Jesus was born. And when we go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, she believes God told her that's where Jesus was crucified and that's where he was buried. I actually don't have big problems with Helena in particular. I think she was an earnest Christian. I think she really believed, but I don't think she's correct. I don't think God revealed to her those things. They're not good reasons for thinking these things. But it is of significance because we're going to go see one of the oldest churches in the world, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that she built. So it has its place, but we're going to be walking essentially a route that I don't think is accurate. This is what's coming up next. Now, how does this all relate to what I really wanted to teach you today? We were walking out of, last night in Bethlehem, we were walking out of the store where we went and did our shopping, and Stephen came up to me and he showed me a little painting that he'd been given that Barrow had bought for him. And the thing was, we got to chatting, and I said there were a lot of beautiful, and I called them icons in that store. And there were beautiful icons, both Greek Orthodox icons, which are paintings, and also statues, which would have been Catholic or which would have been Catholic. There were also some Catholic paintings. Because in the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, they practice icon veneration. Now, just so you know what the word icon means, it's a Greek word, and it means idol. Okay? I do not practice icon veneration. I think that is a violation of the Ten Commandments. I think we're not supposed to make images, and we're not supposed to bow down. We're not supposed to honor the image. Now, theologically, they have explanations for it. I've never accepted those. I don't think the arguments are very valid. But having said that, just to kind of point something out, just this is a little kind of tidbit. If you're an Eastern Orthodox person, they venerate painted images only because in the Ten Commandments it says not to make a graven or a carved image. So they think Catholics are idolaters because they use the graven and carved images, which actually the Orthodox use way more icons than Catholics. It's actually way more a part of their religious worship. But they just use the paintings. They're like, we're not idolaters. We only bow down to paintings. Now, let me say this. Let me say this real quick. Having said that, I do like icons as art. Okay, and here's the thing. So I'm not against the use of icons. I'm against the bowing down before an icon or praying to an icon or praying through an icon, which is the way that they describe it. I do think that's what Moses is warning us against when he tells us not to bow down. I think that's like if you look back at the Old Testament, many of the statues people built were to Yahweh. So I think what God's warning is we don't want you to bow down to icons. And here's why. And I'm going to show you how this relates. There's something about being human that makes us love things, items. Like there's something about tangibleness that it makes it feel more real. Okay? I love paintings. I love Eastern Orthodox icons. I think they're beautiful. There are many Catholic statuary that I love. I think are beautiful. My favorite piece of art ever is the Pietà, which was a sculpture made by Michelangelo, and it sits in St. Peter's Basilica. It technically is an icon. Here's the thing. What do I think icons ought to do? What purpose should they serve? Very simple. Number one, they should serve as teaching tools. We use icons to teach. They're instructive. Number two, they are aesthetically pleasing. We look at things that are beautiful, and it does give us a sense of like serenity and peace. Of course, nothing matches the beauty of God's actual design. And then number three, they serve as remembrance, tools of remembrance. So if you remember Joshua chapter 4, when the children of Israel crossed the river, they picked up stones out of the river, and they came out 12 stones, and they piled the 12 stones on the other side of the bank, and Joshua said, these are stones of remembrance, so that when we come by and see those, we will remember. We will remember. Now, how does this all apply to the tombs that we just saw, and we're going to? All of you felt, I'm sure you guys felt something walking to the tomb. You all saw people, like there was somebody who came out crying very, very fiercely, right? There is something about physical, tangible things that touch us in very powerful ways. I think that's okay. However, they are dangerous because they lull us into worship. They make us want to worship the thing. And that's idolatry. I don't want to call anybody out as idolaters, like pointing fingers. We are idolaters. Like we can't, it is human nature to the core. We want things to venerate and worship. I do it all the time. I mean, at Genesis Land yesterday, when he talked about the TV, I was like, yeah, yes. Anybody who knows me, right? Anybody who knows me knows the TV is my idol. That's, God wants to break the idols in our hearts. And we can use them to teach, we can use them for remembrance, we can use them for aesthetic purposes, but do not venerate, do not worship. And I'd say the same thing here. Is that rock we saw, Golgotha, is that where Jesus was crucified? I'm kind of convinced, but I could be wrong. But it is powerful when you think that. It's very powerful when you think that. When you walk into that tomb, I'm less confident that that was actually the tomb he was buried in. But still, you go in, it's powerful. It's powerful, right? And that's not necessarily wrong if you're doing it for the right reasons. Instruction, remembrance, that sense of aesthetic beauty. It's not wrong in that. But it is wrong if it starts to become the source of your faith, or if it starts to become the thing that you want to venerate, if it starts to become the thing that you're most impressed with. And this is actually the verse I wanted us to meditate on today. I say this a lot. Is this my favorite verse in the Bible? Maybe. One of them. Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24. Yeah, Luke chapter 24. I'm just waiting for people to turn there. Verse 5, Luke chapter 24, verse 5, and this is when the women who are going to anoint the body of Jesus come on Sunday morning. They come to tend to his body, and they come to the tomb, and they see the stone rolled away, and they find a couple of angels, or I guess in this case one angel. The different gospels, some mention two, one mention one, a couple of them mention one. And in verse 5, it says, then as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth. So it was a couple angels, sorry. They said to them, these are the angels, why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. That's it. Why do you seek the living amongst the dead? He is not here. He is risen. It's beautiful. There's something very powerful being there. So I'm not trying to chase any. I wanted to be here. Tucker said this was my first round draft pick, was to teach here. He said this is what I wanted, number one, this spot. Because I like the power of it, right? This might be where Jesus died and was buried. That's powerful. But here's the end. Here's the end. Here's the thing you all need to know. Not really. It's not really powerful. It doesn't matter if that's where he was buried or was crucified. It doesn't matter if that's where he was buried. Because at the end of the day, what matters? He is risen. Why do we seek the living in inanimate objects? It doesn't matter. He is risen. That's what matters. That's the end of the story. He is risen. We're entering into the Easter season. And I don't know how many of you guys do this, but common Easter back and forth. Somebody greets another person. He says, he is risen. And everybody else is supposed to say, he is risen indeed. He is risen indeed. Guys, because that is the foundation of our faith. It is not a church. It is not a rock. It is not a place that looks like a skull. It isn't a tomb. And it's okay to feel the beauty of it. It's okay to feel the excitement. But the key thing is, don't look for the living amongst the dead. All of those things are dead. All of those things are dead. Don't look for them there.